are back, so it's my great pleasure to be moderating the second session today. Hope everybody's looking forward to this. Really glad to be introducing Joyce and Ed. I'll let them introduce themselves and their talks, but I'll just say briefly, Joyce is an independent consultant from the Netherlands. She's a long-time friend of Taxonomy Bootcamp London. Always good to have you back. And Ed is a taxonomy consultant with Electronic Arts who do lots of very cool stuff with taxonomies. So we will do Q&A at the end just to manage timekeeping. So if that's all right with you guys, I'll keep an eye on chat as well, but do use that Q&A now you guys have discovered it. And without further ado, Joyce, are you ready to roll?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Helen. Let me start by sharing my screen and presentation. Just give me 2 seconds. And I think here we go. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And yeah, of course, good to be back again at the Taxonomy Bootcamp. Today I want to talk with you, or the title of my talk is The Journey from a Minimal Viable Taxonomy to a Full Taxonomy. Or to put it differently, how to Flintstone your DeLorean time machine. I love analogies just like Fran did. So I have 2 other things that I want to combine and talk to you about today. So let me go to that. So that, yeah, there it is. So the reason for this topic is as follows. In the last years that I've been working as a taxonomy consultant, in almost all of the projects that I've done, the organization goals for taxonomy were extremely ambitious. We've talked a lot about LLMs in the prior talk, but even before ChatGPT was introduced, there were like buzzwords like the omnichannel, component-based, headless, etc. And taxonomy had to be like the semantical glue between all the contents and data. It had to make their omnichannel and headless ambitions goals come true. So basically, I got the feeling that they asked me like to build a DeLorean time machine, which we know from Back to the Future, I think, with a flux capacitor and everything fancy on it, so we could travel back and forwards in time. And of course, having that question, and as a taxonomist, I was really thrilled to start working and realizing such a taxonomy. However, when we started such a taxonomy project, I found out that there was something to realize such a taxonomy was not something that happens over one night. You have to do with tight budgets, legacy systems, messy metadata schemes, organizational procedures, and just people that stand in the way. So that got me thinking, is there a way to really start with a small taxonomy, like an MVT, a minimal viable taxonomy, that you can use and implement on the short term without blocking the taxonomy to grow further in the future? So can you start with an MVT, or put it differently, can we Flintstone our taxonomy? Can we Flintstone the Back to the Future DeLorean into like a little small car that is not that fancy, take everything off that we don't need at this moment, and do it in such a way that we can expand it later on when we need it, when we need that full taxonomy. And based on on a couple of taxonomy projects that I've done in the past, I think I can confirm that it's possible to have like Flintstone in your taxonomy, but there are some caveats to consider. And that is what I want to share with you in the upcoming minutes. But let me first start by sharing what I think that then should be in your MVT. First of all, let's talk about the scope of your MVT. In almost all of the projects that I've done, there was like one usual suspect for a system. that was obvious that the taxonomy was useful for. That system often had like an urgency and an opportunity to use a taxonomy. So that could be a new content management system, that could be having SharePoint teams, a digital asset management system, an LMS, whatever, any kind of system. It also often had to do with like a migration of old content into that new content system. And I think, that's really the opportunity for using your MVT. So really for the first small steps of a taxonomy. Because it has to do with migrating the content. It also has to do with retagging of content. So that's the ideal moment to start working that on. However, I think there's one thing to note or to make clear, that doesn't mean one content system, doesn't mean that there is one content repository though. I think that I've had situations where there were multiple content repositories, like for instance a file share and a digital management, document management system that were migrated to SharePoint. So there were two content repositories going into one content system, or a knowledge base and a content management system, or a product information system and a content management system. So systems that were integrated. So don't pin on the one content repository, but see if there are content systems available that you can use your taxonomy and develop your MVT for. So that has to do with the scope. Another thing, and it also brings me to the next point, what should be the input for your MVT concepts? And of course, that might be obvious, the concepts, you can derive them from the content repositories. So the content that goes into your system. Therefore, you have to figure out if you have to do with a migration of content, will the migration be as is, or will there be a cleaning up of the content? So figure out what content will go into that content system. And you can then derive concepts for your taxonomy from that content. You can also, what I then do is enrich with what I call content repository related lists. So if you look at that system, you can have like the navigational structures, perhaps synonym list, spreadsheets all over the place, but that are related to that specific content repository. They can be useful as well for your MVT. I also have a look at external lists, external thesauri, open data, etc. And they provide me with input, but I don't let them dictate me how I create the taxonomy. So they inspire me, but they don't dictate me. One note also with this, be careful with the amount of lists that you use and want to use. Keep in mind, we're still working on an MVT. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is one big caveat in this is that you get down the rabbit hole and you see all kinds of lists and you start wondering how to incorporate it as well. And so that's the content and the structures related to that. And let's talk about the people involved and a special remark on the subject matter experts. I do acknowledge that the subject matter experts, the SMEs, are important for your taxonomy development. However, at this stage, I try to keep them at a safe distance. Because what I experience is that discussions with SMEs often in this phase led to more confusion than it brought me input for my MVT. I rather team up with content creators, owners, managers, or however they are called, they have a great insight on what content goes into the content system, which is outdated, what will get out, and what you should focus on. Plus, these people, these content owners, are also needed for support, because often when you start working with a taxonomy, they might be the ones that do the tagging. So keep them involved in this phase. Okay, so that's for the input of your MVT concepts. Let's discuss then what kind of semantical relationships I think should be in your MVT. First of all, definitely have your top level or concept schemes in there. And this is something you have to determine carefully, because I think they're like the backbone of your taxonomy. They are the top levels, often translated into facets, either used for metadata fields or in filtering after a search query. When you want to have your taxonomy like grow into an ontology, they often are going to be the classes in your on your ontology. However, this is also a really hard part, you know, having the concept schemes and top levels. It's a hard thing to understand for the taxonomy newbies. So the people that are not the taxonomists but have to work with taxonomy in the future. They often have the tendency to combine terms, but what I mean with splitting them is like you have a group, and it's very generic, but you can have a group like with topics, audience, so something to do with people, geographical aspects, actions and intentions. Kind of follows, look into the schema.org for some input and ideas on that. So have definitely something to have in your MVT. Another thing that you want to have in your MVT is the hierarchical, the parent-child relationships that we know from a taxonomy. And I think, yes, include them. Seems like obvious, but I once made a mistake not to include them. So I only have the top levels and say, okay, we'll do the rest after the MVT. That was not a good idea. We were able to put that hierarchy later on in, but it cost us a lot of work and efforts to get that right. The preferred and alternative labels. Yeah, so like the synonyms and also like the hidden labels also include these. Yeah, I would say have them in your MVT. Although not many content systems can handle these synonyms and they lack proper functionality for this. I would suggest to store them in your MVT and store them in probably the spreadsheet that you will be using. Even though you can't use it in your content system, it avoids discussions in the future. So what was our preferred and are there any alternative labels? And it can also help the content managers in tagging. Even though it might be not in the content system, they can look them up in the spreadsheet. So I think that's a good one to include. Another thing what I do in an MVT is what we call the upward posting. So for include alternative labels that actually are not alternative labels, but they are more specific. They are child relations. So that in a taxonomy, I put parrots and guinea pigs as alternative labels for animals. That's not correct, and it was not needed for the MVT to have all the animals or needed animals as a separate concept, but I already put them in as a synonym. So when you want to grow from your MVT further on, you can use it and you still have them at hand. Definitions and notes, yeah, that's really yeah, the next one. Definitions is a bit hard because you don't want to be a glossary. But if you have a glossary and you find definitions, yeah, put them in. It's good to avoid any misunderstanding about what a concept is. And also notes are important in this. Also to say what is included in this concept, what do you mean by it, but also how should you use it when tagging. Another thing where I use the notes, and that is combined with what I think would be too much for your MVT, is like the associative relations and ontological relations. So anything that's like across the taxonomy, I think for an MVT they're often too much. It's also hard to store them in a spreadsheet and often impossible to implement in that first focus content system. Therefore, I don't include them in the MVT. However, I use notes to have like a small workaround for these kind of relationships. Let me give an example where I did in a taxonomy. I had a concept for it was for a taxonomy for an airline. We had pre-boarding as a topic, which is applicable for people with a disability. Normally, I would say, yeah, there's not a hierarchical relationship, but it's an associative or any other ontological relationship, not stored in the MVT, but I put it in the notes. And so that's a little workaround and also your first steps towards an ontology. The MVT tooling, and I already said a little bit on that. I think most taxonomies start in a spreadsheet. You know, it's not a taxonomy tooling, but it's where most MVTs start, where most taxonomy starts. And so that's the way where to start and implement it in your first focus system. So what we were developing the taxonomy for. However, in that spreadsheet, a note on that, I advise you to structure that accordingly the discuss standard. Maddie in the next session will discuss more about that. But keep that in the back of your head. So in that way, the taxonomy can be hopefully more easily imported in the content system you're going to use for, but also in a taxonomy management tool once you're further down the road. After you've implemented it in the first focus system, I always also keep track changes of the taxonomy in the spreadsheet. So I really use the spreadsheet as my tooling on that. However, for that DeLorean taxonomy, you know, when we have the full taxonomy, we can't use the spreadsheet anymore. That goes without saying. We really need a dedicated taxonomy or ontology tooling for that. And my strategy is that I start yelling early at the beginning of the project that I'm going to need such a tooling. By that, you spread the word that people know that these kinds of tooling exist. And I shouldn't use ChatGPT to figure out which tools there are, as we saw in the previous presentation. But they get used to the idea of having such a tool. And once the management is convinced that it's that they have to, and in the meantime, you can arrange the budget, the buy-in, etc. So, okay, that's once you have the MVT, you have built your Flintstone car. How can we go towards a full taxonomy? So how are we gonna put Fred and Barney in the DeLorean? I think this is one of the biggest challenges in this road, because you have to really be careful that your MVT won't get stuck in that system that you've developed it for. This challenge is not to be Flintstoning for the rest of your life. We need to further develop and expand the taxonomy. There are some approaches in this that I want to share with you, and some things to keep in mind. First, how you're gonna go towards full taxonomy is to expand the taxonomy with more concepts. So you're gonna enrich it. You're gonna use content from other content repositories, other glossaries. This is also the time to involve your subject matter experts. Now you can have their input. So that is something you can do and work on. Another thing, another step you can take is not have only the taxonomy in that first focus content system, but also in other content systems. So if you've implemented the taxonomy in your content management system, also look at your DOM or your LMS or whatever. And as soon as you want to use your taxonomy for more than one content system, I strongly advise you to move to a dedicated taxonomy tool. So step away from the spreadsheet and move to a dedicated taxonomy tool. That also provides you with the options and the possibilities to store more than the MVT relations that I spoke on before. So the ontological relationships, if you want to go towards an ontology, a knowledge graph, you really need to have such a tool. Yeah, just what I think, and there is not one way to go towards that a full taxonomy. So that's why I brought two cases with me today, some examples for taxonomy projects that I've worked on. The first is for a Center of Expertise for Long-Term Care based in the Netherlands. They had an MVT where we created an MVT that was stored in a spreadsheet without the hierarchy, and it was used in a headless content management system. So the migration there was from, they had like tens, perhaps even hundreds of different websites, different content management systems, migrated into one headless content management system. And the MVT goals there were to improve the findability, but also the reusability of content components. Our way towards a DeLorean here was that we purchased a taxonomy tool. And in this tool, we would not only store the taxonomy, because we wanted to have a centralized taxonomy, but we also stored other lists that were available within that organization. So that were not really good enough to have in the taxonomy, but by storing them in the taxonomy tool and linking to them, that was how we could expand. The taxonomy tool also made it possible to link to external thesauri, so that was a good way to go. And also we had, with using that tool, we also had SCOS as a standard that we were going to use. So that was also expanding in that. What we also realized and made clear is that with a user-friendly interface of the taxonomy, we gave the taxonomy more like prestige. It was not just another spreadsheet that there were so many of in the organization, but it had like, whoa, a real tooling for the taxonomy. So that's how we put it, gave it a good place within the organization. So taxonomy tooling was one of the things that we did in going towards a full taxonomy. We also invested in other things like functionalities on the front end and a governance and a taxonomy governance in place, etc., etc. But I think the taxonomy tooling was really a good one here. Another example that I shared with you, so basically another approach from the MVT that was for taxonomy for an airline, which integrated two websites, so two different content management systems that had to be migrated into one. Here also the taxonomy started in a spreadsheet with hierarchy, synonyms, etc. And it was also multilingual. It contained two languages, and that is not something that I would advise to start with or recommend to have in your MVT. let's so to say, the business circumstances within these organizations made that it was a prerequisite for buy-in of the taxonomy to have 2 languages. Towards the DeLorean journey here started when I dropped the line, hey, perhaps an ontology knowledge graph could be of great benefit in this landscape of legacy systems. It was then picked up by an important stakeholder in this, and knowledge graphs became like a buzzword. Not many people knew what it was, but I thought, okay, let's jump on that wagon. However, we realized within a working group that a knowledge graph is not something you have for fun. I think we realized that also about what the friend just told in the previous presentation. But we knew that a knowledge graph can be leveraged in many ways. So we started with a business case for a knowledge graph. And now we're in the phase of getting, so without any taxonomy tooling, we're expanding the current MVT with an ontology, working towards knowledge graph, but also having a holistic view on what data there is within the organization. Realize getting a good view on the entire domain that we're gonna need to put in the taxonomy, but also teaming up with others. So stakeholder analysis, what are the little initiatives, if you hear something about a chatbot or of course LLMs is something that they downloads the organization, something that we want to jump into. I see I'm a little bit more running out of time. Apologies for that, Ed. But then I want to conclude and sum up that I hope that I give you some ideas and thoughts on how you can work from an MVT to a full taxonomy. And that is not one perfect or ideal road to get there. I think you have to be flexible, sometimes take a corner, another road when needed. However, it can be a really fun road to drive on. Thank you so much for your attention, and yeah, we'll take questions after the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I've got loads of questions written down because this is something I hit all the time, but I won't hog it. I'll let other people jump in. Love to introduce Ed if you're ready to roll.
I am. 1 second.
No worries. So thank you so much, Joyce.
Tough act to follow. Hello, I'm Ed Mateski. This is actually my first industry event as a presenter. So I'm quickly realizing, or I should say remembering, that I'm an English major, a library science degree holder, but I'm not great at making attractive PowerPoints or Google slide presentations. So I apologize in advance. You've seen some really great, visually pleasing, informative presentations. This will not be that. This will be informative, but very basic, very early 2000s, 1990s style. If I do more of these, I promise to either get better or have someone help me make these more interesting to watch. But regardless, just a short agenda here. And again, hello, I'm Ed Mateski. I got my master's in library and information science from the University of Washington iSchool in '99, and I've pretty much worked as a corporate taxonomist ever since. And I've worked for some really cool companies. I'm currently working for Electronic Arts. Helen and I actually overlapped briefly on that at that company. Most interestingly of the jobs, aside from my current one, have had 2 stints at Amazon, one at the very start and one prior to my time at EA. The first time I helped set up the consumer electronics store back when Amazon didn't have third party, so a new store's catalog was only a few thousand items, and so I was able to provide the tagging as well as setting up the browse structure. That sort of set my path. But it also made me really think about how do people search for things? What are good categories versus bad categories? I learned a lot. I probably learned as much about good browse structure in that first job as I did in my couple years at UW. And then the second time I worked at Amazon, I worked in the books and Kindle taxonomies, and that will become relevant a little bit later. So for this particular talk, I want to talk about how we're drowning in content. It's a good problem to have, absolutely a first world problem. But there's new books, new games, new movies, new TV series, new music. Every day it seems like there's something new. And yet, 1,000 channels, nothing to watch. And that's partially because in many ways we're still just using keyword searching or browsing by one or two facets to find something we like, which was fine when content was, especially online content, wasn't as the pot wasn't as big. But as I said, the size of the retrieval sets of just keep getting bigger and bigger, and we're still using in some ways very basic technology. I like to think about the old card catalogs in libraries, and if you were looking for something, you would probably only find at most a dozen books, unless you were looking very broadly. And now it's, when you do a search on most platforms, you're lucky if you find, fewer than a few hundred results. Unless you're able to make your search very specific. So the example for today's presentation is video games. Video games have 7 major platforms across console, PC, and I mean Windows and Mac, and Linux, and mobile. We have 10 to 30 plus years of content for each, and growing. There was at one point a limiting factor where, as hardware advanced, the older games were no longer accessible. But retro gaming is, a huge thing. There's companies dedicated to bringing the old games back. And so if you're a gamer, the amount of content and games you could play has never been higher. On most sites, you can only refine your browsing experience with very broad filters. Platform, release date, the brand, perhaps, or publisher, what the series in some cases, genre being the key one, at least it used to be. But genres has become so bloated in part because they haven't because the result set has gotten so big, the catalog has gotten so big, and the number of genres has only in some cases increased. But in a lot of cases, they're still using the same values from the 90s, the early aughts. That a lot of the stores have pushed genres below the fold because it's just not as useful as it used to be. And what you're seeing are the games that people want you to see, the games that get the marketing or are brand new. And so that's what players are usually seeing. They're going to the front page, they're seeing the stuff that's being promoted or that's just been released. Or they type for a specific game and they bypass discovery altogether. And here are some examples. These are the video game genres for the PS5 console at Amazon, which is very basic. Best Buy, a little better, although you start seeing some mixing of concepts here. GameStop, again, some good coverage. But again, each of these could potentially have hundreds of titles. Now you get a little bit better if you're restricting yourself to a console platform. But if you're looking at PC, and again with the emphasis on making older games available that some people are doing, you potentially have hundreds. You absolutely have hundreds of results in, for example, action, adventure, some of these really broad categories. Even the companies that are making an effort to update the browse experience you still can only usually combine at most a couple facets, platform plus genre or franchise, for example. And so you either get an extremely narrow result set, or again, extremely broad ones. This is the Steam list, and they've at least expanded into additional genres. They've broken out, action into a few more categories. But you're still, most of the time, these other items are not filters you can put on top of it, but you can look at adults only and then everything. You can look at anime and everything. So what can be done? Well, we're taxonomists. What do we do anytime a category gets overstuffed? Or as I like to put it, when the bucket of results gets too big, make more smaller buckets. So in that case, analyze what's important to players when they're searching for a game. Create new, clearly defined facets, and that's a key one, as we'll get to in a second. And step 3, as always, is profit. So what is important to players? Clues can be gleaned when from a variety of sources. One of the ones I liked was looking at the actual genres, both the old and some of the newer ones. You have some that are called, for example, first or third person shooters. And this is actually combining 2 different facets. It's the perspective. Are you the point of view in a first person game? Or are you looking over your shoulder or from a fixed camera angle, a third person perspective? And then the style of play. This is a game where you're just going around shooting things. Survival horror. Once again, style, survival, a game that usually involves building resources and building and husbanding resources in order to avoid a threat. And then also a tone. This is a horror game. This is meant to scare you or fill you with dread. Another example, real-time or turn-based strategy. Again, in this case, we're talking about a pace. This is frantic, everything happens at the same time, or more deliberate. You have the opportunity to think about your move in between your turns, or before taking your turn. And then again, style of play. This is a strategy game. So again, one thing we see is that genres, which used to be which is, or at least at one point was, the key facet for looking for video games, is actually a poor facet, because it's munging, that's a technical term, multiple facets together. Perspective, style of play, tone, pace. You can find them all in some genre lists. So, of course, once we see that, the other thing taxonomists do is we create new facets, and we take what's already there and we make it better. So in this case, for example, we'd replace genres with a facet more specifically targeted at style of play. What sort of gameplay experience are you going to get with this title? Action adventure. There's a story, but it's mostly involved reflexes and timed events. Fighting, you're usually in just a simple brawl, either with weapons or other people. Life simulation, you're setting up a virtual world, and you're making decisions that impact either a person, for like The Sims, or a whole city, like SimCity. Narrative, what some people call adventure, but this is telling a story, and the gameplay may be secondary, and it's so etc. and so on. Just really getting into the different style of play, the different gameplay experiences that each genre offers. And in some cases, this is one where a game might have more. Survival, stealth survival is a thing, where you need to manage your resources, but also avoid being seen by enemies. Anyway, I could go on about genres. It's a pet project of mine. But we should also start looking at new facets. Again, we looked at how some of the genre lists and some that weren't shown. We're combining trying to combine other concepts, like setting. Where does the game take place? Is it a fantasy setting? Is it an historical setting? Is it a horror setting? And so this way we're able to, the potential player would be able to just say, I want to look at horror games. I want to look at science fiction games. I want to look at fantasy games. Tone, similar. What sort of feel does the player want to experience, and what sort of feel does the game provide? Is it action packed? It's just frantic action, whether it's Pac-Man or Call of Duty. Is it casual? Is it something you just pick up and put down as you see fit? Does it tell a dramatic story? Is it funny? Does it make you feel soothing and peaceful? Is it scary? And if you combine, the fun thing with this is you can start combining these with genre, and you can start seeing some fun combinations. So you could have scary horror versus funny horror, and that's your Dead Space versus your Plants vs. Zombies. You can have historical casual, and that's hidden object games set in the 1920s, versus fantasy casual games. That's your urban fantasy mixed with your find the objects in the vampire's antique shop window. We could also make some other facets that further refine the experience. Perspective. Do you want to just look at the characters in 2D? Do you want an isometric perspective, first person? If you want first person, do you want a VR experience, and what flavor of VR? Third person, ones that let you switch in between, top down. Number of players is really big. I mostly only play single player. If there was a way for me to say, don't show me a game that doesn't have a single player mode, then that would be great. And this is a case where you would have to there would have to be some rules to figure out. When we say single player, do we mean a meaningful single player, and that you could just play the single player experience and be satisfied with your purchase, or is it a token, like a tutorial or a shooting gallery, where the single player is more of an afterthought, and it's really meant to be played online? The Call of Duty games come to mind. It's like, I think some of them have had a very basic single player campaign, but for the most part, you're buying it to play online. That's more of a judgment call, and those become more difficult, of course, for taggers. But those are the sorts of rules you would want to figure out as you were doing this. When you say single player, do you mean any single player or primarily single player? Just a little sidebar on that. Pace, again. I mostly want turn-based, or something I can walk away from for a bit if I need to. Scope. Some people like linear. Some people want procedurally generated is all the rage. Endless content. Open world. I just want to be able to just walk around and do whatever I want. These are all things that gamers are looking for, and depending on what list of genres you're looking at, they're trying to cram into there. So let's just break them out. So with this level of specificity, we can now, as I sort of alluded to before, we can now have scary science fiction first-person shooters, Dead Space, funny horror first-person shooters, Plants vs. Zombies, Battle for Neighborville. I think it's Neighborhoodville, actually. Sorry. Peaceful first-person puzzler, The Witness, fantasy isometric role-playing, Planescape, and a bunch of others. So what is the benefits for going to this level of obsessive detail? Better UX. Customers can get very granular when browsing for a game, with the potential for more obscure titles to surface in the first couple pages of results. Sorry, I didn't mean to be quite reading this like a cue card, but the point is, by being able to more specifically say what they want, they'll get better results, and we'll see more than just the most popular or the newest stuff, and that improves the chance of discovery. In a related note, better recommendations. when players can be more specific with their selections, and games are tagged with more metadata, recommendation engines aren't just saying, hey, this person played this game, which is a first person shooter. Show them all first person shooters, even if the others have absolutely no bearing on, even if what they played was a single player and all these other ones are going to recommend are online. Or they played Portal, which is a first person puzzler, and we're just going to show them Battlefield and Call of Duty and all the shooty ones. This way they would be like, all right, let's show them stuff that's actually similar to what they've played, not just the broad category. And harkening back to an earlier presentation, better AI/LLM implementation. As I think is becoming more apparent, LLMs work best when everything is tagged well, because they will still not understand. They still don't understand something unless they have good data on it. And so the more we tag this content with these additional pieces of metadata, the more likely the LLM will be able to answer a query of, hey, I want a scary RPG. And the LLM will be like, oh, well, here's a list of things tagged with scary, maybe fun, maybe horror and RPG. The barriers. No surprise here. This is labor intensive, especially if adding this to a catalog of thousands, which is what most modern video game catalogs that this would be done to would have. So that is definitely a big barrier. Who's gonna pay for it? Who's gonna do it? Etc. It's also not super effective on smaller catalogs. So I talked about how the issue this is trying to solve is the result sets that are, hundreds, if not thousands of results. If you have a catalog that's, just a few hundred titles, whatever type of catalog it is, you don't need this level of specificity probably, because your result sets are probably going to be in the tens, not the hundreds or thousands. But even if your catalog is too small for the full package, as I like to call it, you could still improve your customer experience by looking at how people are searching for certain concepts, and see if there's room to either expand your primary facet, your categories, or if there's room and technical ability to add some filters to enhance the search. This is something we discovered at Amazon. Easy to game. So number one, it's labor intensive, but the way some companies get around it is they outsource it either to the customers. Steam has public tagging on their titles, or to the publishers, which is what Amazon does. Everybody who sells stuff has the ability to add tags. And what the problem with that, of course, is either through apathy or malice, people will either not tag at all or do very basic tagging, or they'll over tag if that's an option. Books on books and Kindle, we would see dozens of tags added to a new title across multiple categories because they just want their title to show up in as many categories as possible. There are whole seminars about how to game the Amazon system, and that is something you open the door to if you outsource your tagging. And then the last one, so I am a bit of an idealist. I come up with these great ideas, but what I think are great ideas, ways to improve the customer experience, but it does require the customers to get on board with me. I want to give them more options to select in order to find a better result set, but that does require the customers to buy in and click on more than one thing. The more you make a customer click, potentially the less they'll do it. But if you're able to educate them and say, hey, here's a new experience, and you can find new games that you haven't seen before by taking these extra steps, then maybe you can get more buy-in.
How are you doing for time, Ed? Because I do want to make sure we get a
Yeah,
few questions in before
almost. I do not have much left, but thank you for the reminder. So big surprise, we're not just talking about video games, are we? This is the group I would go to with just I have a whole other presentation on more detail on my video game ontology slash taxonomy. But this, I realize we don't need to be that niche. This could be this approach could be applied to all sorts of media and probably other catalogs. Media is just near and dear to my heart. Comics, role-playing games, specific genres of books, music, movies, etc. There are a few real-world examples of companies that are tackling this issue in their own ways. Netflix pioneered microgenres. That was early on. It was very exciting to see with my fellow taxonomists at Amazon. A new company called Storygraph, trying to be a good read competitor or supplement. They ask us a short survey that includes some new, not just the genre of the book, but the types of features that you want in the book that you want to see or don't want to see. And then bringing back the Amazon angle, about 10 years ago, me and a bunch of other books and Kindle taxonomists, we were getting the fiction categories needed further refinement because, again, the result sets were too big. And so we created not just subgenres, but character and theme facets tailored to the romance, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, and thriller catalogs. And that allows you to do things now to, for example, look for contemporary romance titles about bikers that also involve a secret baby, which is not mine. That was my great colleague Kelly Berglund. That was her contribution, and is just the best example I've ever had for this sort of work. And that's it. I know I talked very fast, and this was very high level compared to some of the crunchier stuff that other people have had. But hopefully, it still gave people some food for thought. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed. I had no idea this was your first ever speaking gig. I just assumed you've been doing this for years. So no, really appreciate that. So yeah, we have run a little over time, but I do want to get the questions in. I've got one for Joyce, and then I want to cover the ones that we've got in the chat. If we don't get to them in sort of 2 or 3 minutes, if you guys could be succinct, we'll deal with them afterwards. So I'll ask my one of Joyce, asking for a friend. How do you sell MVT if your company wants waterfall and they want you to solve the problem at the first go? Just a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think, well, actually, last for a project, the idea of MVT was really got sold very quickly because I sold it as you can start with it very easy. We can give it a try to see if it works and how it works, and nothing will go wrong. It's just like putting them, just reassuring them that it can grow in the future.
Yeah, it's like that reassurance. Fantastic, thank you.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, all right, sorry to rush this. I want to get in as much as possible because you guys have clearly stimulated a lot in our audience. So someone is asking on the Q&A of Ed, not a full question, but if you could expand on the genre project as a taxonomy and video gamer fan, I think they would really want more of that. So I think, Ed, that is your cue to write or speak more about this work.
I could talk about that. I could talk about that for hours. So I will happily. If Helen will have me back, stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm not the only gatekeeper. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but yeah, no, please do communicate more stuff. Then Adrian Brisky has built multiple gaming taxonomies and always struggled with the amount of subjectivity that exists within genre and theme. I think we can all sympathise with that. We've all been on that kind of project. Just briefly, any creative solutions to making those tough decisions? Just a couple of sentences.
They are tough decisions, and so the best solution is, one, make sure your facets are as objective as possible, which usually means having more and have them go into a lot of depth. And two, just accept that you make the call, and some people you won't please everybody. So just as long as you can back it up with your with good definitions on your facets, that's the best you can do.
Cool, thank you. I'm worried about time. I do want to give people a comfort break. Joyce and Ed, are you
Sure.
happy to kind of type live answers in
Yeah.
to make sure we cover these? Because yeah,
Yeah.
clearly a lot going on. But
Fine
yeah,
by me.
I do want to thank you. No,
Absolutely.
you're both so interesting, and I think I really worked putting you both together because it's all about being really pragmatic and making tough decisions.